Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I usually don't do this, and I don't believe in doing this for the most part, which is like a response video to some speaker about Islam or some scholar about Islam. I usually think it's wrong to do so, but in this case, because I think it's important and people need to have a balanced opinion, and because I feel very strongly about this, so I'm going to actually talk about that. And that is that the idea of going back to the Salaf, when we say that statement, what are its limitations and what does it contain, have to be understood properly. So I actually will give the example of a tree, okay? That, once you have a seed, right? There's a tree and you have the seed and the tree becomes a tree, okay? And you'll see this in my second point in more detail, where the tree becomes a tree. Now, the Quran and the Sunnah and the asanid are like the genes, right? They're like the genes of the ummah. They're like what make us who we are. But once you're a tree, you can't go back to the seed. As time goes by, you're no longer the seed. So that in that sense, you can go back to the genes, which is the asanid, the Quran and the Sunnah, and the understanding of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, the understanding of the Salaf, the first generation, the second generation, the third generation. You can have their understanding, right? Their attitude and their understanding, but it's not like you can, because a lot of people act like, oh, we're going to go back to Quran and Sunnah, we're going to go back to Quran and Sunnah, as if you're standing before Allah and His Messenger and the companions and getting answers from them. And that is not true, because time has left, right? And that's why you are not part of the early generations, because you don't have access to that. You have access to it on paper, you have access to it on pages, you have a feeling about it. You can say there's like a spiritual gene that permeates the ummah in regards to it, but you cannot pretend by saying we have to go back to Quran and Sunnah as if you are actually going back to Quran and Sunnah, and pretend that your understanding of understanding the Quran and Sunnah is as if you were with the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. To think that would be a very big mistake, because then you leave no room for the fact that maybe I have a mistake, and you leave no room for being humble, and you leave no room for maybe there can be another opinion, even though companions of the Prophet themselves did have different opinions amongst themselves. But a lot of times when people think that they have the authentic source, right? I am with the authentic Islam. What happens? They don't listen to other opinions, and they're not open to other opinions, and they're not open to other interpretations. Now, so the first point I've made is the Prophet and his companions were like the seed in historical terms, right? And you can't go back to Abu Bakr. You can't go back to Umar. You cannot go back to the Prophet ﷺ in the sense of actually like making a phone call and going back. Reading a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ or reading many ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ on a single topic or many topics is not like you're on the phone call where you get to ask all your questions. No, it's more like you are just given the information and then you have to do istinbat. You have to take out from the information you're given the understanding that you understand. And this is why, leads to my number 2 point, the development of fiqh and ilm al-kalam. Why did we have to develop the different schools of thought? Why did we have to develop anything? Why did we have to develop tajweed as a subject? Why did we have to develop Arabic language as a subject? Why did we have to develop Islamic law? Wouldn't it be enough to say, go back to Quran and Sunnah? Why do we need to create different schools of thought? Because they had different methodologies based upon their understanding of what they did not have access to. So Imam Malik had a certain understanding. Imam Malik felt, for example, the people in Medina are a source of authority. They're a dalil. If the people of Medina are doing something, the children of the Sahaba are doing something that contradicts a hadith, he will go with the children of the Sahaba. That was his understanding of what it means to be Salaf. Okay? The point is, they weren't there to ask the companions of the Prophet. So Imam Malik had to do istinbat. He had to think, okay, what's the best way to get closest to Allah and His Messenger and have a best understanding? So he had the idea of A'mal al-Madinah. which is that if the children of the Sahaba are doing something as a group, as an ijma', and a hadith narrates something different, it's better and safer to stay with the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. And the point I'm trying to make here is that he had to come up with a way to understand the Quran and the Sunnah because he was not there. The same thing with Imam Shafi, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. Just because Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal wrote many, ahadith in his Musnad, 70,000 plus hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ in his Musnad, doesn't mean that it was like he was actually sitting before the Prophet ﷺ. Yes, I do want to mention at a spiritual level that when you hear Quran, you should feel like as if Allah is talking to you. When you hear hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ, you should feel like the Prophet's sitting there and telling you, or the events are happening before you as if the Prophet's there. But that is still a psychological phenomenon that happens in your mind. Like when you're reading a book and you're reading about characters and images are formed by reading about that character, but it's not really them. It's just an imagination of your mind. It's a feeling that it creates inside yourself. But in reality, you're not able to sit before the messenger and ask him clarifications for many of the questions. And that's the reason we developed the Islamic sciences. That is the reason we developed Islamic law. That's the reason we developed the subject of ilm al-kalam, to know what is right, what is wrong. Okay? So let me just, now let's come to today. Okay? There are issues, for example, cloning. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا تبديل في خلق الله. Do not change the creation of Allah. Now what does that mean? I can't go to the Prophet to ask him, does it mean what it literally means? Don't change the creation of Allah. So what about cross-pollination of trees that was done at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, which then he allowed, when he had first disliked it, but then he allowed it? What about do not change the creation of Allah, and the argument that, well, we're not changing the creation of Allah, we're taking the creation of Allah. We're not making it into something that's not the creation of Allah. We're taking the creation of Allah and you can say doing a type of cross-pollination, except with tree, instead of trees, it's with animals. Can I go to the Prophet and ask him, is something like cloning going to be allowed? To give babies blue eyes instead of brown eyes, because brown eyes is their dominant genes and blue eyes is their recessive gene, and maybe I can manipulate something. Is this playing with the creation of Allah or not? Can I go back to the Prophet ﷺ and his companions? No. People are going to look at the past and look at the attitudes of the past and come to a certain conclusion based upon sitting far away in history, trying to take the general idea that Islam wants to give us, the spirit of Islam, you can say, and trying to come to a conclusion. Voting. Is voting enjoining good and forbidding evil? Or is voting equivalent to participating in a kufr system? A system that's an ungodly system, and you're participating in it, and you're voting in it, and you're trying to... Which one? Can I go to the Prophet and ask him this question? No, of course not. What about salah? If you want to be of the Quran and the Sunnah, so let's talk about being of the Quran and the Sunnah. Who led the salah? Or specifically, what I'm referring to, leading the salah, is the salah of the khutbatul Jum'ah. It was the leaders. Now, leaders don't lead the khulafa or the Prophet ﷺ. And then after the Prophet, Abu Bakr, right? And after Abu Bakr, all the leaders led the Salatul Jum'ah and gave the Khutbatul Jum'ah. So, what are you going to do now? Now we have just any Joe Schmo giving khutbah. Is it okay? So, the point is that interpretations have to be done because time has changed. For Eid al-Fitr, the Prophet said, give them food. Do you now give them food, or you give them money? Do you give people money, or you give them food? Even though it was the sunnah of the Salaf to give food. But then later on, a few generations later, at the time of, I believe it was at the time of Ali radiallahu anhu, there was some currency exchange issues. So when it comes to halal and haram, you want to go back. Okay? When it comes to halal and haram, you have to go back to Allah and His Messenger and the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. But there are issues that the Prophet has talked about. سَيَرَى اِخْتِلَافٍ كَثِيرًا. You will see many ikhtilaf in many issues, the Prophet said. But what is he referring to? He's specifically talking about bid'ah in the sense of changing Islam completely, halal and haram issues. Because there are issues the Prophet talked about. You will find in the Quran, many discoveries the Prophet ﷺ. It's the discoveries of the Quran its delights will never finish. Right? So the Quran, for example, if there's ayahs of embryology, now this is a religious issue or a dunyavi issue, that if there is an ayah that talks about a certain scientific point, do I have to go to a scholar to understand that, or do I have to go to a doctor to understand that? If it's, for example, embryology. Now, that understanding that ayah, is that religion or is that dunya? There is no distinction in Islam between dunya and akhirah as such. Islam is a lifestyle that you choose to have. It's not like, oh, that would be a schizophrenic personality. Oh, this is my religious side of my being, and this is my dunya side of my being. This is I'm doing for the akhirah, this is I'm doing for dunya. There's no such thing in Islam. Either you are living the Islamic lifestyle, which is for this dunya and akhirah, or you're not living the Islamic lifestyle and you're living for dunya. So anyway, that's a separate issue. But the point I'm trying to make is, Quranic discoveries. If I go to a scholar and say, hey, can you show me how does this work in embryology? Is that a religious issue or a dunyavi issue? Because it's hard for a Muslim, it's both. For a Muslim, it's an ayah of Allah. It's a sign of Allah. It's a miracle of Allah. You're reading about embryology in the Quran, right? So there are things in Quran that have to do with the future. Meaning there are things in Islam, in the nusus, that have to do with the future. What about the prophecies of the Prophet ﷺ? What about the very idea, Imam Abu Hanifa, when he developed his fiqh and developed a particular methodology, he said, and this was a general understanding, that we are establishing these rules of Islamic law because they knew they are coming to a situation where there are new issues. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. In Mecca, do you know one of the muftis of Saudi Arabia, he did not allow microphone because he thought it was a bid'ah. That was a religious issue to him. But it was a technical issue, but it was a religious issue. Microphones were not allowed for a long time. Do your research, okay? So, yes, there is things that we have to go back towards. But again, like I said, it's never like being with the Prophet. If anyone thinks that reading hadith means like I've sat with the Prophet, they're highly mistaken. Okay? You are always going to take out from an event of a hadith, you're going to take out from it what you want to take out, what your mind is already looking for. Okay? It's not going to give you the same experience, the same impression. It's not going to do tazkiyah for you in the same way as if you were in front of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? So when it comes to iman, or what some people call aqidah, halal and haram issues, you want to go back. And when it comes to other issues, you want to be up to date so you know what Quran is saying to you for that time. And this is another very big understanding. That people think Quran is stuck in the past. Even though the Prophet ﷺ clearly in hadith told us the Quran will have new interpretations, new levels of understanding as time goes. Quran, sanurikum ayatina, we will soon show you our signs. Sanurikum ayatina fil afaq wa fi anfusikum hatta yatabayyana annahu al-haq. We will show you our signs until it's clear this is haqq. So Allah is opening His signs. There was no, Allah is opening His signs. There was no Gospel of Barnabas, for example, and we read there that Isa ﷺ is talking about a man named Ahmed, who we know as Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So as time goes by, there's also certain discoveries. It's not always about being in the back. And to understand the Islamic rulings, you have to know the times. You can't talk about test tubes without knowing what it is medically. And not also, you have to know the halal and haram. So it's not a matter of choosing. So what Yasir Qadhi is saying is that it's not a matter of going to a religious person, because who knows more about test tubes, a doctor or a scholar? First you have to understand what the issue is, then you can go back and see if it fits within the spectrum of halal and haram. So don't make scholars your reference point for everything, even when it comes to religion. For example, I just mentioned ayahs that have to do with science. biological issues that doctors have a better understanding of, right? Your frame of reference of who you're going to ask what question will probably change. The other thing is, yes, in fiqh, in ibadat, nothing changes, right? We have to do copy and paste when it comes to the Prophet ﷺ in terms of ibadah. But in terms of mu'amalat, life issues, right? Things can change. We're in a different situation, right? In terms of aqidah and iman, things cannot change, right? That's like, it's like absolute. Movement and community issues can also change depending upon the question and what the situation is. And when we're talking about Islamophobia, for example, we're talking about the community, we're talking about being a movement, what the Prophet would have done exactly in our situation, when he was in a different situation, you have to still make an interpretation. Yes, of course they went through what you call Islamophobia, which I think a better term is anti-Islamism, because phobia is like just a fear, who cares? You know, but being anti-Islam is actually what's happening. It's not just a phobia. There's a, one is like, I got like a psychological phobia of like being a homophobia, right? No, that's not what this is. This is anti-Islamism. This is being anti-Islam. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that certainly you have to look at the situation, the distress. أَفَحَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. Do you think you will go to Jannah without going through the difficulties that people before went? Right? أَفَحَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَقُولُونَ آمَنَّا وَهُمْ لَا يُفْتَنُونَ. Do they think they'll say we believe and they will not be tested? وَلَنَبْلُغَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. We will test you. That is clear. The companions were tested. We're being lightly tested in comparison to what the companions were tested, but the situations are different. The idea of anti-Islamism is there, but how do we maneuver in that situation? The Prophet's not before me to ask. Okay, now, when we say Islam is complete, الْيَوْمَ أَكْمَلْتُ لَكُمْ دِينَكُمْ, today I perfected my deen for you. And so therefore we assume that means that we have given you the answer to every question. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not given us the answer to every question. He's given us the guidance to everything. There's a difference. He's given us the guidance to everything, which means that if we apply the Quran and Sunnah in the right way, which also includes in it, fiqhul mawaqi', understanding your situation, right? Which will be different from the other situation. Let me give many examples of this from the Prophet ﷺ. When the Prophet ﷺ sent his companions to Abyssinia, did he not know the situation when he sent them all the way to Abyssinia? He understood the environment he's living in, and he knew where to send his companions, peace be sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and radiyallahu anhum. He knew where to send his companions to Abyssinia. When he was doing hijrah, he knew which route to take and how to cover his route. Right? He understood the situation of his times. The Prophet used to talk about like goats of certain tribes. They would have certain type of hair, for example. Why? The Prophet was very keenly aware of the situation he was in, just like you would have to be very keenly aware of the situation you're in to be able to apply the Quran and the Sunnah. And in that, being keenly aware of the situation you're in, and being aware of what Quran and Sunnah says, the gap between them requires an interpretation, which there can be more than one interpretation. There can be more than one solution. And so what Yasir Qadhi means is that we're not sure exactly which solution the Prophet would have preferred in this gap between understanding our times and understanding the Quran and the Sunnah. We would not know how to make this gap, how to fill this gap. Okay? Because that would require interpretation. One person based upon, maybe he is very outgoing in his person. Like for example, like the difference between, like for example, Ibn Umar was very literal sometimes compared to Ibn Abbas, have different opinions. Because of what? Mostly because of their personality. Anyway, so this is what I want to say, is that there is no way to actually go back to Quran and Sunnah. And the people that make it look like it's so, it's just a humble jumble of emotions. We wish we can read hadith and Quran and it's like we're back to the Prophet ﷺ. But in reality, we have to, the gap between knowing your times, okay, okay, the knowing your times, and over here I want to add one last point, knowing your times, okay, knowing the nusus, the Quran and the Sunnah. You need to understand both of these to understand your priorities, fiqhul awliyat. Okay, so understand the priorities of what's, okay, is saving our youth first, doing da'wah to non-Muslims is first, etc., etc. Understanding your priorities based upon understanding this, the Quran and Sunnah, knowing your times, and then coming to a solution. Can there be a difference of opinion? First of all, is there a gap between knowing your times and Quran and Sunnah? Yes, there is a gap. Number two, once you try to bridge this in some understanding, can there be a difference of opinion on what are the priorities and what we need to do and how we need to do it? Yes. And that's all that's being said. That's all that's being said. And to say that, act as if the Quran and the Prophet ﷺ give us a solution to everything is a simple example. Alif Lam Mim. We do not know what that means. And it was not intended to tell us what that means. It was not intended to tell us what that means. In the same way, general principles have been given to us, and it's not intended to give us exact solutions for everything. The general guidance has been given, and you use that guidance based upon your ijtihad, your understanding which the Prophet allowed, to the best of your ability of being able to apply the Quran and the Sunnah. So, just like the difference of opinion is not there on the fact that, you have to first understand Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet, and then you have to, if you don't find it in Quran and Sunnah, then you have to apply ijtihad. But ijtihad means that there's a gap, the Prophet's not there. Right? So do we have to do ijtihad today? Yes, of course we have to do ijtihad today. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say, and not keep it too much longer because I do have a lot more to say on the issue, but I think this will give a general overview that, it's like a tree in terms of time. There was a development of Islamic sciences because the Prophet wasn't there, and the Prophet didn't develop these sciences for us, right? Whether the whole hadith sciences, all of the hadith sciences, what is making the asan? This is a human effort. So many issues even today that could have more than one opinion, right? Even salah, for example, I gave the example. I gave the example of the Eid al-Fitr of Sa'ah. Then I gave the example of Quranic discoveries, right? Versus halal and haram, going back to the past. There's no difference of opinion. When it comes to aqidah and halal and haram, you have to go back to the salaf. You have to go back. But but there are so many issues that are not within the realm of halal and haram. Like community issues, movement issues, psychological issues, sociological issues that are outside the context of halal and haram. Right? So for example, let me just, as a closing example, drinking Pepsi. Right? Within halal and haram, well, it's allowed, but should we be doing it? How bad really is Pepsi? Is it like drinking cigarette? It's not like drinking cigarette. Is it at the level of cigarette? Are you killing yourself by drinking Pepsi or Coke or these sodas? People can have different opinions in this. It's not like we can go to the Prophet and say, "Oh, Prophet of Allah, can I drink Pepsi?" Right? You'll have to make some conclusion with your mind, with your understanding. So anyway, that's what I have to say. Assalamu alaikum.